Good afternoon. So this course is 4 weeks long, obviously 6, 7, 8 hours, whatever we'll have together. And we have all of 10 minutes, actually 8 minutes, actually 7.5 if I keep doing this. So I'm going to go kind of really quickly and kind of give you a really broad overview about what the course is about. And then I assume we have time afterwards for some questions if you have any questions. Okay? So I'm a historian of religions, which is a phrase most people have never heard of. I have trouble on planes when people ask me what I do. I never want to tell them because they always misunderstand what it is I do. But basically what I do is I'm part of a place to track religious ideas and religious experiences and religious traditions through large tracts of time. We're sort of interested in religion with a capital R, and not so much this or that religion. We see individual religions as historical examples or instances of very broad sort of themes and human experiences that are both very, very ancient and certainly distributed globally. So we're kind of interested in the big comparative picture, if you were. There's probably no more ancient a religious idea or more a universally distributed religious idea than the idea of the soul. If there is, I can't think of one. The idea of the soul, very briefly, is this idea or this notion or this experience that the human being is not what you see. What you see is not what you get. That there's something about a human being that is not the body, that is not the intellect, that is not the socialized ego, that is not the ethnicity, that is not even the religious identity. There's something about the human person that transcends all of that. And that in many religions, but not all, survives bodily death. Okay? That's the basic idea. Now, contrary to what some people might think, that idea comes in hundreds and hundreds of versions. Not all religious traditions think of the soul in the same way. They think of it in radically different ways, actually. To just give you one very simple example of this, most of the monotheistic traditions that came out of the Western tradition think of the soul as kind of a one-life model. It's created at a certain point in time. It has a single life cycle. It experiences death, and then it's judged on the basis of that one life. That is actually not the case in most of the other religions, particularly in Asia, where they have a multi-cycle or a reincarnation model, where the soul evolves, as it were, through many, many life cycles. And it just goes on and on and on until it reaches its eventual goal. So, there's two completely different models of what a human being is and what a human soul is. Historically, most religions have developed in cultures in which we as a species have been glued to this floor, right? We've been sort of glued to this plane that we experience as flat, and we see things above us that we don't understand. And so transcendence, or the realm of the gods, historically has always been up. Okay? Because we're on this flat surface, and so anything transcendent to that world is up. Okay? And I could go through hundreds of examples here. The gods dwell on the mountain. The gods come from the sky. Angels have wings. You float up. The soul floats up when it dies. These are all sort of symbolisms of up. Okay? Now, what's particularly interesting to someone like myself is what happens to that symbolism of up when human beings as a species come off that flat surface and go up. Right? We start flying around the planet and floating around in helicopters and floating out in space. And we realize with something of a shock that there actually is no such thing as up. Up is entirely relative to where you are, both on this planet and in the cosmos as a whole. So if you would look at models of the universe from the 3rd or 4th century of this era in say, the Mediterranean world, you would see that the Earth was right in the middle, and there were these concentric rings that moved. These were where the moon and the planets and the sun, and it was a kind of a perfect spherical model. And it was believed that when the person died, you actually literally physically moved through these heavens. They called them the heavens. So when Paul, for example, says he was taken up to the third heaven, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about this concentric model. That's no longer our model. We know that's wrong, right? We know the Earth orbits the sun's a star, we know it's in a solar system, we know we're in a galaxy, we know there are billions of galaxies, we know they're exploding into God only knows what. And so the question then becomes, what happens to the soul after we know this stuff? You know, how do people experience transcendence after they know there's no up? Okay? Now one sort of, I think, possible answer to this is, of course, they don't. Transcendence goes away, there is no soul. And of course you see this answer in a lot of modern cognitive or neuroscience, where the soul is essentially evaporated. The problem with that is that people continue to have these experiences. People continue to see loved ones after they die. People continue to have out-of-body experiences in car accidents and heart attacks and accidents. But what you're starting to see is this symbolism of up is sort of morphing into other dimensions now, and people are talking about seeing in 4 or 5 dimensions. So a kind of hyperdimensional world is coming in when the 3D world no longer works. So if you're in a 2D plane, the 3D world's transcendence, but now if you live in this 3D world, you need a 4th dimension or a 5th dimension to kind of get out of it, right? So one of the questions that this course is going to ask, and it's a question, it's not an answer, is how has the religious imagination responded to NASA, to modern cosmology, to modern neuroscience? You know, how is the soul changing? And I think the quick answer to that is a lot. And so what we're going to do in this course is we're going to look at some of the ancient accounts. We're going to look at some of the sort of classic scriptural accounts of the afterlife and the soul. And then we're going to look at, particularly at the 19th century, when all of this starts to shift and change with the birth of modern science and modern anthropology. And then we're going to look at the very, very contemporary period through the lens of not only the near-death experience, but also, and I think even more interestingly, neuroscientists and medical professionals who themselves have had these sorts of experiences, and the kind of shifts they make in their worldview. From a kind of materialistic or mechanistic worldview to one now that can encompass and embrace some doctrine or some belief in a soul. But where they land is very, very different than where our ancestors would have landed even 100 years ago, much less 1,000 years ago. Okay? So the course is really very much about this whole history of what a human being is and what the soul is. And I think one of the other takeaways from the course will be, I think when most people think of the soul, we operate with a very, forgive the word, naive notion of the body as a container. We sort of think of ourselves as a 3-dimensional container, and that there's somehow a soul somewhere inside the body, right? We're not sure where it is, actually. If you look at religious literature, they don't know where it is either. Sometimes it's in the heart, sometimes it's somewhere in the skull, sometimes it's spread out through the whole body, sometimes it's floating above the body, but we want to think of the soul as some kind of spiritual essence that is contained in a body, right? And so when the body then breaks down and collapses, the soul escapes or leaves, okay? What you see in these modern accounts is sort of a challenge to that. And I would put it this way. I would say in the very, very modern accounts of the soul, it's not the case that the soul is in the body. It's more the case that the body is in the soul. And that makes all the difference in the world once you start thinking in those terms. If consciousness and the soul is a function of the body or is in the body, then when the body dies, the soul either escapes or it goes out like a light bulb, right? If, on the other hand, the body is in the soul, when the body dies, the soul doesn't, because it's the container of the body. The body is not the container of it. Okay? That's very abstract, but that's essentially a summary of the course. The course also will end on a couple sort of very contemporary anthropological studies of ghosts and possession, particularly in South Vietnam and post-tsunami Japan. And what we're seeing in these parts of the world is a kind of epidemic of haunting of families and vets and all sorts of individuals after the devastation of either the wars in that part of Asia or the tsunami in that part of Japan. And there, the model of the soul we'll be working with is what I would call the ghost or the haunting or the possession as a kind of unresolved traumatic memory. Okay, so we're going to be thinking about what a ghost is and what possession is and what hauntings are. And I'm going to also insist that they're not just matters of South Vietnam or Japan. They're not just in Asia. They're here. They're here in our own backyards. People are haunted in Houston. People experience possessions here. And they often involve these sorts of traumatic memories that are unresolved. And so the way to deal with the ghost or the haunting is to address the trauma, address the memory, and then the ghost or the haunting goes away. Okay? So we're going to look at these different models of the soul over these 4 evenings.